speak a little bit about your own influences and your own work that went up to this.
Well, the only sci-fi stuff really was, you mentioned Monarchs of New York, which was, I wrote about a dozen years ago, which was a series of short stories that in part one that became a series of longer short stories in part two that became a novella, and the novella part of it was science fiction. And there's no real connection to here, other than that the characters do occupy the same vague Schneiderverse universe. There was then I had within a book that I did about this pedophile, which I based it on the case that's, if you see the documentary film Capturing the Freedmans, it's a book I call The Trial of Horacio Guzman. So I have this guy, Horacio Guzman, who is accused of molesting young boys, and while he's either incarcerated or under standing trial, he's reading this sci-fi book written by someone else, and there are some notions about corporate nation states and human robot or human artificial intelligence sex couplings and whatnot. And that got a little bit of connection here, because I have what are cyborgs, which I call bions in my book, and then the androids, which are called Andes, versus regular humans, which are called nats or naturals. So those are really the only antecedents there. As far as this science fiction book, the initial progenitor, the work that, just like with Rocco and his brothers got me to make Shetty Brothers, the work that started this was the film version, not the novel, but the film version of The Desert of the Tartars, which is about this. It's an Italian film from, I think, '76, and it's about this group of people in sort of what seems to be like a French Foreign Legion type outfit that are somewhere. It was filmed in Iran, but it's somewhere waiting for the return of the Tartars to come and attack this outpost fort of this European type Foreign Legion thing. And the whole film is about waiting. It's a much larger, much better version of Waiting for Godot, because there are many characters and we get a sense of their characters. So I said, well, what if I have a science fiction film where they're waiting for the return of something? So this gave me the idea of this characters, the Shone. And the Shone are really based upon the great 1956 sci-fi film. And I say great, it's not up with 2001, but Forbidden Planet, which was based upon Shakespeare's The Tempest, where you have this group of aliens called the Krells who build this sort of artificial world almost, and suddenly they disappeared. And they disappeared because they tapped into what is called their id, the monster of the id, and they destroyed themselves. So I combining Forbidden Planet with The Desert of the Tartars was where the initial idea came from. Then as I wrote it, I said, well, let me do this as part of this genre trilogy, this Elias Walker trilogy, this heroic trilogy. And so I had the hero set in the Old West of Texas, 1850, the anti-hero set during the late 20th, early 21st century. And then I decided, let's go way out, because if I just go a couple of hundred years, I don't think human beings are going to be out into the galaxy. But given the fact that, probably I think within 500 or 600 years, the pace of technology, we'll probably get to then super light speed. We'll start colonizing things, assuming that there aren't hostile aliens out there that are going to destroy us. And so that's why it's set during the 3400s, the 35th century. And we get, I also give a kind of backstory, which there's obvious influence from the Foundation trilogy of Asimov, which also, so I bring in the Mulists, the descendants of the mule from a Norwegian in the family. Then there's Beowulf too. The Beowulf stuff is the most obvious in that this Elias Walker is a Beowulf character, in that we don't really know much about Beowulf in his actual poem. He sort of comes from across the sea. He comes in and he destroys the monster that's been harrowing the Danes. And so the Grendel monster is basically called the dogfish here, which ties directly back to Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is swallowed by a dogfish, which ties back again. There's also the Moby Dick influence. When the dogfish is subsequently vanquished, we get its mother or its progenitor, the progenitor, which is a bigger, more deadly kind of creature. And then the end of Beowulf, just like in this here, we get 50 years later, we find out from the main narrator that Captain Elias Walker has also battled these things that they call the worms, which is very similar to Beowulf, where he battled dragons 50 years later and then died. In this book, he doesn't die. Another influence, though, was, I remember about 20-some years ago reading the Superman Dies comic books, when Superman got killed off by this creature called, what the hell do they call it? Doomsday. And so when they killed off Superman, they brought back 4 Supermen, but it affected the whole DC Comics universe. I'm not a big comic book fan, but one of the best, because I was working at the time at a magazine distributorship. So for about a year or so after they killed off Superman, I was reading the Superman comics, and I was reading this Green Lantern comic. And in the Green Lantern comic, it's interesting because this leader, I forget the name of it, has this world called Apocalypse, and I think he crashes some computer program down that wipes out this city in California. It's the de facto San Francisco of that universe, called Coast City. 6 or 7 million people die. The Green Lantern, there's this great scene at the end of one comic book where the Green Lantern is back and everything's normal. Coast City hasn't been destroyed. And then we see it's all in his head. And I said, well, that would be good. What if the Green Lantern, though, could have resurrected everyone? And eventually the Green Lantern, the character is called Hal Jordan. Then there have been, I think, 2 or 3 subsequent Green Lanterns, and they've rebooted it now, and I guess Hal Jordan is back to being the Green Lantern. But Green Lantern goes insane. He kills off a lot of the good guys of the Green Lantern Corps, and then it's found out that he's been being controlled by an alien, doesn't know his power. So all of this ties into what happens to the Elias Walker in this book. So with all of that sci-fi and comic books and film stuff, and they all played little parts, and it's sort of like welding them together, but tying them into my universe through the Elias Walker clan that first appeared with the Elias Walker super spy in A Norwegian in the Family. But the one thing I did do when I got to this book, I said, okay, I've had the first 2 books being narrated by Elias Walker in the first person. I said, I don't want to do that because it's fine to have a hero tell his own story, and the first Elias Walker isn't a boob or a bumbler so much as a guy who just lucks into things. The second Elias Walker, the anti-hero, it's cool to have him tell his story because having him as an unreliable narrator only enhances his anti-heroic qualities, as I explained the last time we talked a month or so ago. But I didn't want the superhero to narrate his own story. I said, the superhero is going to be superhuman. He's going to understand, feel, know, to use the term from a famous science fiction book, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. He's going to grok certain things. That was the term that Heinlein used, grokking, G-R-O-K. He's going to grok things that an ordinary person couldn't. So I had to create a narrator there, and I said, well, the best way to create a narrator, I said, I could have gone the Sancho Panza Don Quixote route, but better yet, I said, since this is going to be set on a starship, and we have this superhuman, let's have the guy be a guy whose job it is to tell stories. This is a human recorder. And so I figure in 1,500 years, everything is going to be recorded and whatnot, but I talk about how laws were developed for privacy and whatnot. We have ships controlled by robots or by artificial intelligences that can control them. But there should still be a human recorder of things to give the human point of view. So that's why I created the narrator of the book, Francois Xavier Meljean. One of the things I did do, too, is I made both of the male characters black and bisexual. And I didn't do that for any particular reason other than I wanted to have, since in this era, sexuality, race, religion, no one gives a shit. the main sources of conflict within humanity will be the naturals, the bions, and the Andes. And actually, androids represent something like 70% of humans out there. The bions are like 20-25%, and the rest are naturals. Out of, I think I say it's something like 70-80 trillion human beings that are spread out throughout the galaxy, or at least the 8 to 10, 12% that humans have colonized. So having that puts it in an interesting position that we have these characters that would be traditional outsiders sexually and racially, ethnically, but now they are part of, they are telling their story as if they are part of the majority. And anyway, so the Elias Walker character is the guy who eventually transcends. The Meljon character is the character who tells the story. He's the de facto Ishmael, in a sense. And so that's the basic setup.